Why don't I begin by acknowledging who we have here. And within the room, we have Melissa Rooker. Susan Metzger is not able to attend today. She did pass along some notes to us to share with you if need be. Ryan is joining us via the web. Gary is here in the room. Angie is here in the room. Susan Lindahl, I have not seen her yet. We'll wait to see for her. And then Chris White is online. I see you. And then Mary Sinclair and I are also in the room. And then we have staff members around the table. Tyler's here. Bob Robinson's here. Dr. Fulton, Russ, and David Atterbury is also here as the financial advisor for the district with Steeple. Have I covered everyone? All right. With that, why don't we begin? We put out an agenda earlier today, and hopefully folks have a copy of that in front of you. But really, there's just two items that we're going to discuss today, this being our October 22nd meeting. We will have a lengthy discussion about the considerations that the board is reviewing regarding an upcoming bond offering. At our last school board meeting, there was a presentation and discussion that took place regarding various options that are being considered. And now it's time for the Finance and Facilities Committee to also review this presentation and provide some input, some thoughts, some questions as we prepare eventually for the Board of Education to consider it at the meeting later this month. So with that, I'll introduce Dr. Fulton, and you can go ahead and introduce your team, and welcome. We look forward to the presentation.
Okay, we have with us Russ Knapp, our Chief Financial Officer, Bob Robinson, who's in charge of facilities, and they have some acquaintances and staff members with them. So Bob, why don't you do your introduction first, and then Russ, you'll do yours.
Tyler Clubb is here with me too, the facilities director.
I have David Atterbury, who's our financial advisor for many years for this school district. He's with Stiefel Nicholas. Brought him here to answer any expert questions.
All right, very good. And so those are the introductions.
Mr. Stratton, are we moving next to the presentation?
I want to make sure everybody can still see who's speaking. So I'm going to do a test here real quick. Ryan and Chris, when you see Dr. Fulton speaking, does he pop up on your screen as the speaker?
I just saw you stating on the big screen. I could see his small picture.
Okay. I was wondering if something was voice activated that I need to set at my end in order to then allow the speaker to be the one that's present or most present. I'll work on that. So my understanding is that at this point that Dr. Fulton and your team have a presentation to walk through?
We do. I'm going to make sure that folks on WebEx can hear me okay. Can you give a thumbs up if you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mr. Stratton, you may need to do something in terms of sharing this. I can't actually share my screen at the moment. Are you able to share, Russ?
I didn't log in.
How's that?
That still did not do it for me.
I've made you the presenter, and let's see what else I can do here.
While we're working on this, Russ, can you log in and see if you're able to share? What I'm doing is, at the last board meeting, we did a presentation on the bond issue, and that's the October 12th board meeting. You can go to Board Docs and find that. We're going to work on getting it pulled up here. It was 3.01, our strategic plan bond issue. And so I just want to do a walkthrough of that same presentation. Again, this is in the public domain, and we'll just walk through some of the elements of it. And I'm going to see if Russ can pull his up so he can, maybe Russ, you can share from your screen if it's letting you do that. We're going to get some technical help here. To give an overview while we're getting this pulled up, to give an overview here, substantively, what the committee has heard and did here at our last meeting has fundamentally not changed. What we did do is we did our community survey, and in that community survey, it asked a question about what the interest or support would be for a bond issue that was a little bit more than a no tax rate increase bond issue, but less than the tax rate increase that was in option B. And essentially, that tax rate increase would equal out to about $8 per $100,000 home value, or property value, I should say. So with that, we then put together what an option C might look like. And that's what we want to share tonight. And Russ, are you able to?
I'm not.
Okay, we got a little bit of a technical problem here then, and I apologize for that.
No.
Dr. Fulton, this is Shannon from the tech group.
Yes.
On your screens, with you being the presenter right now, is the share button available to engage?
That's the problem. It's not
Okay.
coming up for me.
Okay, all right. Are these documents somewhere that perhaps we can try to, we've got a whiteboard.
That was me doing the whiteboard. I'll take it back down.
Yes, they are
Okay.
on, they're on the board agenda.
Yeah, they're on board
Okay.
docs,
Okay,
And this is from
let me see if,
October 12th.
Yep.
okay. In the meantime, I will try to go pull those up and see if I can try to present them.
Yep, it's the October 12th meeting, item 3.01.
Okay, so while these two are working on trying to
I apologize
get
for that.
technical, no, we're totally sorry. So the goal, I think, for the first half of this meeting is to go over the bond issue and to really think about three questions. Are we on target for the timing of the bond, which we discussed a lot kind of in the last meeting? What questions or feedback, thoughts do you have around the three options? So we'll go through the three options. And then the third piece is getting your feedback and thoughts about the messaging that will help inform people about the decision in front of them regarding the bond. So those are kind of going to be the three things to keep in mind. What information are we sharing about the bond? You know, do we understand the details? What feedback do you have about the three options and the timing that we're moving forward with? How are we on?
Shannon, are you able to project it?
I am trying to get that pulled up right now.
Let me ask you this. Can I just do this from the other computer that WebEx is on in the room?
You might be able to. I might have to share it there. Let me see, and I'm also going to reach out and see if one of our friends down in the tech area can run in the room as well, but I'm going to try to get this brought up from here.
Yeah, that would be best. And again, for those of
Yeah.
you that are logged into a computer, if you go to the October 12th board meeting and you look at item 3.01 strategic plan bond issue, then you can, those are the slides that we're going to go through. And I'm going to walk through a couple of things conceptually here as a reminder until we can get into the slideshow. Everything that we do in our strategic planning process, as you know, revolves around our mission, and that really focuses on meeting the needs of all of our learners that we serve, and also doing it in a way that provides an inclusive culture, an engaged community, and a lot of robust opportunities for our students. And as you know, this year has been a real test of our ability to work in what is a really complex environment to carry out that mission. And our staff's doing a great job with a lot of patience from our parents and our students. It's important to remember too, I mean, we are in a moment in time that's really challenging, but eventually this pandemic will go away. So this bond issue is very much about looking beyond the present moment and continuing to plan for our future. So in the course of doing that, everything that we do goes back to that mission statement and our 3 objectives. That whole notion of every child having a personalized learning plan that ensures they master the priority standards that are foundational to their academic success while also gaining interpersonal skills they need for life success. Sitting in the background behind those 3 objectives are the 5 strategies. And 2 of the strategies that we've really emphasized in our plan is strategy 4, which talks about establishing a process for data review and decision-making with a focus on being responsive, not reactionary, as the strategic plan is implemented over time. And I want to emphasize that phrase in there, responsive, not reactionary. Everything that we've been doing in our strategic planning process is exactly that. We're trying to build a thoughtful plan that is sustainable over the long haul. And then as part of that sustainability, we have strategy 5, which we really look at focusing on resources of state-of-the-art facilities. We did a lot of study in that first year of implementation, which actually was the last year, if you can believe that, because we didn't adopt the plan until June of 2019. We did a lot of study last year around the strategic plan. We brought together a variety of groups to look at what our facility needs were. We did that during the strategic planning process, and we've continued to engage people through both groups and thought exchanges, for example, to get their thoughts on issues. And then, of course, this past summer, we conducted a survey and asked folks what their level of support would be for various aspects of any bond issue. And Shannon, are you having any luck, or are you?
Would you please try to move the presenter ball to me, in that either you or Brad is the primary host, or if Dr. Fulton can move the little ball to my name.
Well, the problem is my buttons are they're not
Do you
working.
want to show 'em? Click on
Yeah.
her picture. and
Oh,
the
yeah,
3
yeah,
little
yeah.
dots
On Mary's?
on Shannon.
On Shannon's, yeah. Got it.
And then the 3 little dots.
Yep, got it. Okay, Shannon, there you go.
Okay, all right, let me see if
All
I
right.
can get this to engage for
So-
you all.
All right, so let me get,
Can you see that?
yes, okay. Go ahead and flip through the next few slides here.
Okay,
I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Keep going. You're going to go down to about the 5th slide. I've already covered all that. Keep going, please.
okay.
Okay, stop on that operating fund slide. The one up right, go up. It's lagging, yeah. Let me give a slide number, Shannon. We are on slide number
Okay.
5. That's slide number 6, operating fund. The operating fund, as you recall, is used for salary and benefits, daily operating expenses, cash flow, and adding staff. And we've recommended a guardrail for this of a minimum operating fund balance of 1 month expenses or 8.3%, whichever's greater. And part of that is because KSD recommends a fund balance of 10 to 15%. This is all information that we've talked about before. And then we're talking about operating funds for new staffing. We came up with a plan to address strategy 3.22, which was to increase the number of secondary certified staff by up to 78.5 FTE for the purpose of reducing workload for secondary teachers. Now, the problem is, in order to do that in our context is we can't raise our operating fund, our capital fund is maxed out, so you have to get there a different way. And the way in which we can do this, I'll show you a graphic here in a second, is to address that through a bond issue, and then you begin to shift capital funds over things you're doing, capital funds over to bond, and then that frees up some operating funds. I'll go to that slide in just a second. But on the operating fund for new, it should say operating funds for new staffing, Shannon. What we identified is we needed about in the neighborhood of around 5.8 million to make this work. Now, the good news is through the IBB process, we were able to set aside about 900,000 of new money we received this year, kind of wall that off, so that would be available to us so we could start hiring staff for next year this fall. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So about 900,000 of that 1.3 million of new money that need to be allocated for reducing workload is done. So that's a real credit to the whole team for making that happen. What we have to now do is address this issue of the extra 400,000 that's left on that category, and the 4.2 million that requires moving custodial and maintenance from operating into capital. Next slide, please, Shannon. The facilities, it really gets your facilities through capital and through the bond fund. And so one of the things that we're recommending is that as you start to shift custodial and maintenance salaries into capital, that you really do a hard cap of 25%. That keeps you from getting into trouble with your capital fund. One of the things that districts have done over the years is if you overspend in that fund, if you go up to the max, which would be around 32% or so, is that right, Russ?
Yeah.
Then you're basically going to really limit your ability to address all your capital needs going forward. Go to the next slide, please. Currently in our capital fund, we have about $35 million that we receive annually. And because we have a little bit more in that, we're able to spend 114% this year, 111% in 21-22, and eventually get to where we're working within our budget in 22-23. But by doing it this way, it allows us to begin to make that shift of maintenance and custodial from operating into capital, which frees up the money to add staff in our operating fund. And then Shannon, if you can go to the next slide. The timeline for this planning process, it really started back in 2016. That really predates the strategic plan. We were doing site evaluations. In spring of 19, we had a facilities action team, developed steps for a long-term facility needs. We approved the plan in summer of 2019. You might recall that our original concept was we'd go out for a bond issue in January of 2020. We did not do that because we felt like there were some other things we needed to address in terms of long-term sustainable funding to address secondary workload. That work was completed. And so over the course of the 19-20 school year, and that takes us up to where we are today. If you go to the next slide, please. This gives you a little bit of an idea of the scope of the magnitude of what we have to do with our facilities. We have 5,400,000 plus square feet of facilities. We process about 17,000 work orders, and I'm not going to go through all this with you. It gives you an idea that we are a big district with a lot of facilities, and trying to keep those maintained and updated is an ongoing challenge that never ends. And so you have to anticipate what those needs are going to be, plan for them, thinking 15 to 20 years out is a reasonable thing to do. If you go to the next slide, please. As part of this work, we've spent a lot of time looking at what our most immediate needs are for all buildings, as well as things like renovating the Early Childhood Center, redoing our Career Technology Center. And I want to emphasize that while a lot of emphasis gets placed on rebuilding elementary schools, there is a lot of remodeling of existing structures that does occur. Think about our middle schools and high schools. Those are really big facilities. Unlikely that we're going to build new middle schools and high schools because of the cost. So you have to put a lot of money into ongoing maintenance, repair, and improvements to address those facilities. When it comes to, if you go to the next slide, please. When it comes to understanding how this transfer works, and just stay on that slide where the people are, please, Shannon. With the circles and the people. This is an interactive slide, but what happens is this. We are spending some of our capital money on new buildings. We're going to take we're not going to do that anymore under this plan. We're going to do all the rebuilds, any kind of new construction is going to come under bond issues only. That's why that buildings are under bonds. So by doing that, it allows us to get to that 25% and spend that money on custodial maintenance salaries, which is allowed. So those are going to move under capital. Not all of it, but a big chunk of it. And then that frees us up. You can see the smiling faces under operating. That allows us to add teachers at the secondary level because we now have the funds in the operating budget to address those needs. So that's how you that's why the bond issue is important in order for us to meet the secondary workload demands, reduce secondary workload for teachers. If you go to the next slide, please. We did a survey with Patron Insight. We had 500 residents that were interviewed across all feeder patterns, 100 per feeder pattern. That was all done this summer, and we shared the results at the August 10th board meeting. If you go to the next slide. One of the things that came out of that survey is that there was support for a bond issue, but that support varied a little bit depending on the scenario. So if you look at the first one, if we did a $22 annual increase per 100,000 home value, about 63% said they would strongly favor that approach. Now this has a plus or minus 5% margin of error. We'll keep that in mind as we go through this. And then that was option B that we looked at before. Essentially that was option B. We also asked, if you go to the third bullet, about a no tax rate increase, and 83% of the people said they would strongly favor that. But there was an in-between scenario that we built as part of the survey that we were curious about. And that was, what if the tax rate increase went up what would amount to $8 per $100,000 property value? And we did some fewer projects than what we would do in option B, which is the $22 annual increase, but more projects than a no tax rate increase. And that came out at 78% that strongly favored that approach. Now, here's what's important to know. There's a significant difference between having a $22 annual increase per 100,000 at 63% in favor or strongly favor, and the 78%. There's a significant difference between those two numbers, between 63% and 78%. There is not a significant difference between 78% and 83%. So those two are very similar to each other. And so you kind of keep that in mind as we go through the remainder of the slides. And I'll move through this quickly so you have your conversation. If you go to the next slide. At your last meeting, we looked at option A. That was the one with a no tax rate increase. These numbers have modified just a little bit as we've tweaked the number some as it relates to assumptions and assessed valuation increase. That would get us about 187.2 million. And then you have in the first bond issue. Now, it's really important to note, we are talking about a bond issue for 2021. The other two bond issues that are noted in each of these scenarios are simulations. They're accurate simulations. They give us a good idea of what's going to happen next. It does not necessarily commit future boards to doing it in exactly that way, but it does give you a really good understanding of what has to happen in this bond issue and in the next two to not only address our facility needs, but also keep our capital funds strong so we can maintain enough revenue in our operating fund to address that workload issue. If you go to the next slide, option B, that's the one with the tax rate increase of $22 per 100,000. And that gets quite a bit more in there in terms of the bond projects. And then in option C, you have, this is one you've not seen. You reduce, you're kind of going between the two, between A and B, and you're getting about 264 million projects in there, worth of projects in there. And that's an $8 per $100,000 home value increase. If you go to the next slide, functionally this hasn't changed. At the end of the day, after 3 bond issues, each one of the options, A, B, and C, put us in really good shape compared to our peers in Johnson County. We still have a much lower mill levy than what our peers would have. And then, so at that point, if you go to the next slide, please, we talked about next steps for the Board of Education, which is to try to reach consensus on which option they might be interested in and also look at the date of a bond referendum. I recommended to them that we approve a bond resolution. If we want to do something in January, which, you know, we talked about that at the last meeting, and the arrow pointed a bit in that direction. Although there wasn't complete agreement, that was the arrow was pointing in that direction. That in order to do that, we'd have to approve a bond issue by the October 26th board meeting. If we're going to put a bond referendum in on January 2021. And that is, by the way, our first opportunity to put a bond referendum on the ballot. And then if you go to the next slide, did a little analysis for the board on the bond issue. Next slide, please, Shannon. This gives you an idea of some of the considerations we need to think about. Think about level of community support. There was community support for all 3 options, but clearly the level of support was highest for what we've defined as options A and option C. There clearly were, we could create fiscally sustainable pathway to get to secondary workload with any of the options. We can maintain existing facilities with any of the options. You get more rebuilds in with older elementary schools under options B and C. Now, you get 4 rebuilds at the elementary level with option A. You get 6 rebuilds with option B. And you get 5 rebuilds with option C. And it's important to note, this is really important to note, that in each one of those scenarios, let's say you do 4 rebuilds, it doesn't mean that the other two rebuilds will never happen. It just means that they would have to be delayed until the next bond issue was passed. And sometimes the time frame in those rebuilds doesn't really vary that much, because the more money you spend on a bond issue, the longer it takes to get it done. So that while you might be able to do an option A, you might be able to do that in a 4 to 5 year time frame. Something like an option B could look more like 6 or 7 years. So the actual time frame in which rebuilds might occur may not be that much different between the two. We also talked about managing the scope of the work. Option B, that's a lot of work. And it definitely takes more hands on deck to make sure that that can be done. It can be done, but it's probably going to extend the timeline for all the projects. A and C kind of fit within a little bit easier to manage range. But again, all of them can be managed effectively. And then finally, we just ended up, on the next slide was just a board conversation. The board talked about the different options that were available to them. That's where you come into play, because we wanted to have this meeting tonight to give you a chance to take a look at what those options are. Again, the specifics related to A, B, and C are, if you go to that document, that board meeting, the options for A, B, and C are there for you.
Shannon, if you give me back control, I think I can pull up the file. I downloaded it, so I can move it around with questions as they come up.
All right, thank you for the presentation. As a reminder, what we're charged with doing today, we'll do this in two steps. The first would be if you have any clarifying questions on behalf of this presentation, the update, introducing of the option C, because once we walk through the clarifying questions, then we will move on to three pieces of discussion. One will be about confirming the date of January of 2021. The second will be a discussion as to which of the bond options between A, B, and C. And then the third one would be to offer guidance and suggestions to the board as best ways to begin to present this to the community as a whole. So I'll turn to committee members to see about any questions, clarifying questions, and we'll begin with Gary.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm looking at option C right now, and my first question would be, I have two of them. It says tear down Catherine Carpenter. Have they got any plans what they're going to do with the land after you tear down that building?
There are no definitive plans for what we're going to do with the land. That's a question mark that's still on the table. You know, typically when school districts tear down, as you know, tear down a site like that, you look at two options. One is you keep it for future use. You might repurpose it in cooperation with the city, or you sell it. But right now, the use of the land hasn't been defined. And I don't know, Bob, if you want to add to that or not.
No, that's absolutely right. We've looked at it and possibly working with the city to use it temporarily until we decide what we were going to do with it, but there's no definite plans been made at this point.
And then my second question. There we go. My second question is I was looking at the different schools that you have listed for rebuild. Have they taken into account like the attendance of the schools that they're rebuilding? Because, I mean, I've been in the district for almost 14 years. So I know Westwood View's constantly been back and forth on whether they're going to send those kids to another school or keep it open. And I just thought it was interesting they were going to rebuild it or have it down option. I mean, that just was asked. I was just interested in that.
That's a great question and an important one to ask. We have looked at the enrollment projections. That's one reason why we did the enrollment projection study, to see what the population size of those buildings were going to be. There's really a couple factors there. One is we'll certainly effectively use buildings. We've got 3 buildings kind of in a row there. We'll certainly effectively use all 3 of the buildings up in that area. Second thing that we know we get into is once we do these rebuilds, it tends to regreen the population a little bit. It tends to draw more kids in. So we also are keeping an eye to that. Now, I don't think you're going to get huge numbers of increases, but you never know. So we definitely have the enrollment projections, and we've been looking at that as we've been doing our analysis.
Thank you. Other questions from committee members? Yes, Melissa?
I would just tag on to that conversation, living up in that area and knowing the rebuilding going on. There is already re-greening. I can look at my own neighborhood and point to brand new babies and all of the activity to tear down and rebuild. And I think there's a lot in that northeast quadrant that is happening in terms of regrowth of the school-age population.
All right, I see hands from Chris and then Ryan.
I have a couple of questions in deciding how we're going to approach this and when and how much. Are the assessed values increasing in the district? And has Johnson County given us any projections? And secondly, since we are at interest rates are, bond interest rates are really low right now for the district to buy bonds or to sell bonds. And is there any thought on how much that would affect how much money we can spend in each one of these scenarios? Is there some reason why A or B or C is more advantageous based on the bond market?
Have Russ Knapp handle that one.
Hey, Chris, this is Russell. I'll tackle that first question. Our assessed valuation has been steady in the 5 to 6% increase. We will get our final evaluation here in about 2 weeks, but the estimate was right around 6% that we built our budget on for this year.
And is, everybody's talking about the, home values going up. Because of that, Johnson County, I'm sure, is going to look at that and the assessments are going to increase. Is this one push that we should take advantage of is what I'm getting at? Because, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and I love the idea that you're planning, Dr. Fulton, Brad, everybody, I think it's an incredibly good idea to plan out 18 years, 3 bond issues out. And are there advantages financially for the district over these 3 scenarios?
In relation to the assessed valuation?
Well, yes, because, it's going to mean how much more money we're going to have.
All 3 scenarios.
And rates.
All 3 scenarios over 18 years is trying to address $750 million worth of projects. The mill levy impact will be very similar 12 to 18 years out.
Okay.
So the difference is upfront on what the initial bond issuance is going to be. That will determine what that mill levy will be.
Okay.
And to clarify
Thank
that, is a assessed valuation inflation factor built into that over that period of time?
Yeah, our scenarios, we used a 2% assessed valuation growth. So obviously, if the assessed valuation grows more than that, the mill levy impact will be less than what we presented here in these scenarios.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Ryan?
It's a little correlated to that. First one is, how has COVID and the outcomes of this changed what you might want to do? So, kids went back to school 2 weeks in the younger ages, and my middle school and high school going back this next week. Is there any agenda or plan that needs to happen or strategy around communication around if, this time next summer, kids still aren't back in full school in the classroom? So I'm just kind of curious what thought process went in on, as far as getting a bond on the ballot for January 21st. What's that look like in the aspect of COVID potentially delaying things even further?
Yeah, great question. We have been thinking about that, and since it's unknown exactly when the pandemic ends, our thought was to go ahead and keep going, because the reality is let's say there is a vaccine in the next 6 to 12 months and life returns to normal, we're up and running, we're in good shape. But even if it's 2 years from now, we've still put ourselves in a position where we can make sure that when we're able to open everything up exactly the way we want, that we're ready to go. And we're not waiting to do projects that we know have to happen anyway. For example, we're going to need to engage in things like roofs, asphalt, HVAC systems, regardless of what happens with COVID-19. And I'll add to this, one of the questions that's come up for us at times is, what about HVAC systems? Because, if you can make your HVAC systems better, then perhaps that helps with keeping kids in school. So I'll have Bob address that, because that's something we spent some time on as well.
We've talked to numerous engineers about that, and would the design change significantly since COVID? And right now, they're saying no, but that data is changing all the time. So we will review that as we go along and see if there's any changes we need to make as the design starts happening.
Could I jump in and ask kind of a related question? What is the air quality standards kind of related to another industries for a school? So when we think about just kind of air quality generally in a new facility, how does that align with, I don't know, LEED certification or with, general air? Is there a metric around that?
I don't know of any metric around that, but we did design the last schools to LEED Silver, I believe. Don't hold me to that. And we will design these the same way. Each engineers we were talking to were saying that they don't foresee a lot of changes. There is different systems that we can look at, and we will continue to do that. Low volume air systems is one that came up, and the newer systems will do the MERV 13s, which is, the more of a 50% filter. So that's a big plus, no matter which way we go. So it will just be continue to monitor that and make adjustments as they have more data.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
That's one advantage with newer buildings. Obviously, the cost of putting updated systems in is kind of, you can bake it into the cost of the new facility. The problem comes with retrofitting our older facilities, particularly our middle schools and high schools, and that's a lot of square footage. And as you know, HVAC systems are extremely expensive, especially if you have to go back and retrofit. So that's why we've been paying close attention to it, to see, is there anything that might change our prioritization of what we have in the bond issue. And at this point, from what we're hearing, we seem to be on, it seems to be okay and on track.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Melissa?
Thank you, Brad. As I toggle between the three different plans, the focus is on, discussion's been on the number of school rebuilds, but it looks like the line items themselves, besides the rebuilds, are pretty much the same, but the dollar amounts vary between the three plans. Is there anything else that I'm missing that is different between A, B, and C?
Bob, do you want to go through that?
Yeah, you're correct. The big difference is the elementary rebuilds, the different numbers. But to make the dollar amount work, we did have to adjust some of the other numbers just to make it balance out. And I don't believe the tear down of the Carpenter was in the original plan. So those are really the two bigger differences that are in there.
Okay. Can I just drill into what the difference at the Early Childhood Center between the different plans, the scope of work that can be accomplished, how that differs with the varying dollar amounts?
Well, the design is not complete at this point, so we've just had preliminary plans, so I can't really give you details of what each one of those would look like, but
so it's how big we can dream about upgrades?
Restroom renovation will be one big plus to that, and then, roof replacement was in there, so.
So that'll be done across whichever plan we do, but with some of the additional funds, there would be other features that could be provided. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I'm looking at the screen as well as in the room here, see if I can see hands. If you wouldn't mind one more time, because I think it got skipped over as we were doing the slides, the piece about the ability to move, take care of some of the salaries under the bond versus under operating, and how important that is to this bond.
If you could go back, do you have the presentation up? If you go back that one slide that has the caricatures on it.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think this is probably the most
Sorry,
difficult
scroll.
concept to get across, understandably, especially if you don't work with it every day. I'll wait here for a second. And we actually have an animation on this. We're working off of a PDF.
Yeah, it just,
There we go. Whoops.
it'll come back. It just,
Okay.
every time I click it, it's going to it scrolls through everything.
Okay. The concept is this: take the schoolhouse under bond and shift it over to capital. Right now, we do some of our rebuilds out of bond, and we do some of them out of capital. And that's worked okay, as long as you have the money in capital to do it. But what we've decided to do in trying to address the issue of workload is we basically have to stop doing that, so that all rebuilds, all new facilities would be done solely out of bond. And that's why you have the schoolhouse now under bond. Anything that's new or rebuilds, that's going to be done through bonds, or it doesn't happen. By doing that, it frees up money in the capital fund for us to shift current custodial and maintenance salaries that are being paid for out of the operating fund. We shift them from the operating fund over to capital. And Russ, that's to the tune of about $4.5 million, right? So we're going to take what we're currently spending, $4.5 million, we're currently spending in the operating fund for custodial maintenance, and we're going to shift that cost forever and pay for it out of the capital fund, which means $4.5 million that you used to be using for new facilities, it's not there anymore. It's gone. That's why you have to get all that out of bond. That frees up that $4.5 million in the operating fund that now can be used to hire additional secondary teachers and reduce workload. So that's why the passing of the bond is essential for us to be able to do secondary workload. And in addition to the $1.3 million of new revenue that will have to be added to that. So does that adequately explain it?
I wanted to raise that again, because in our discussion, that'll be a very important part, not only for us to grasp, but then how do we convey that to the community as a whole?
Right. It is actually not, and I'm going to be very blunt, it is not fiscally responsible on our part to move forward with reducing workload at the secondary level unless and until we begin to get those capital needs addressed through the bond issue. It's critical that we address ongoing facility and maintenance needs through bond issues, both the one coming up and future bond issues. The good news is, even with a mill increase, we're still way below where our county peers are. And this is really the only mechanism we have left to free up money in our operating fund in a fiscally responsible and sustainable way to address that secondary workload issue. I might add this too, and I think sometimes this gets lost. You know, our peers around us, at least in Johnson County, do have a 5 out of 7 model. I mean, they do have reduced, what amounts to reduced workload for their secondary teachers in ways that we don't. So we're simply trying to move to meet a need, but it's also going to make us more competitive with our Johnson County peers, which helps with recruiting and retaining teachers as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Other questions before we do the discussion? Is that you, Chris? Yes, go ahead.
Brad, what are the undefined projects at the middle schools and high schools other than the technology, the bathroom upgrades, the security upgrades that have been mentioned?
Chris, we've had ongoing meetings with principals and are trying to get our hands around what those projects would look like. But like you said, restroom renovation is.
I know those are fine. I was just the ones that hadn't been defined yet for those funds. Never mind.
We're still in the process of defining those. We don't have those completely defined yet.
And what ongoing maintenance components, other than HVAC, roofs, asphalt, concrete, playgrounds, are going to be part of this bond maintenance, ongoing maintenance component?
I'm not sure what part of that you're talking about. I mean, they're listed out
I said,
on the
are there
plans.
anything that you, water lines, service lines, electrical, are there anything that, other than HVAC, roofs, and asphalt and concrete that are going to be included in that list that you know of at this time?
We don't have anything included in that list at this time.
Okay.
You're right. There's bound to be some of those that come up, and we're hoping that we have capital funds to address those also.
Bond funds or capital funds?
Both. We'll still have some capital funds that can address some of the unknowns that will come up.
All right.
And if I could
Thank you
inject
very
there,
much.
because that's really important, in the three circles that were on the screen, and I'm going to say that slowly so Mary can click on that picture. One of the discussions that the board has had was putting limits as to how much capital can go towards salary expense. And I believe that's 25%, but I'm looking for nods.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay, so that speaks to Chris's question that there's still 75% of capital that truly would be available for capital projects above and beyond the bond work, the bond paid for work. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and that's one of the reasons it's so important is that if, for example, during the course of the year, you have an HVAC system go down, that's separate from what you're going to address in a bond issue. You have to be able to fix that system, or you get something that's unexpected, you have to be able to address it. It can't wait. That's why you have these capital funds identified and available to you, so you can not only address the known needs that are coming up, but the unknowns. And with this many facilities, you're going to have unknown things that you can't completely predict, right? They're going to occur.
Okay. Ryan?
You know, you just mentioned it, Dr. Fulton, the unintended consequences. I'm kind of curious, if you look at the long-term viability of the district, what are some of the unintended consequences that could happen by moving these buckets of money around? So, you know, relying on the bond for all district improvements, what are some of the negative things? Because, and you may have discussed it, but to me, it all looks really positive to do this. There's got to be some negative things, and I'm kind of curious what those are.
Well, there's always a risk that the world changes on you, right? The assumptions that you used in designing this model shift in ways that couldn't be predicted today. So, but that's true of any decision we make financially at this point. But you know, you could run into additional capital needs that you won't be able to meet because you've allocated that money to salaries for custodial maintenance. But to be honest with you, that's something that before even putting this plan together, we gave a lot of thought to. And you want to try to approach this as conservatively as you can because you don't want future generations to be burdened with a decision that had you just thought through a little bit more, you could have prevented them from having to go.
Yeah, that's all I was asking for, the fact that you guys looked at it and reviewed it, and if you did, I'll take your word for it. So thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we put in that 25% cap. That helps, that's really a safeguard.
And I'm going to add to that by looking around the room here. One of the uncontrollables is that the monies that are provided to us through operating is a function of the legislature each year. And so there's lots of formulas and criteria that go through that. And so if we're really thinking about all the possible scenarios out there, Ryan, one of them would be that there would be legislative changes that would tweak or redefine capital, redefine operating beyond how we currently know it to be. So I'm looking down the table at Melissa to see if there's any other examples that I'm not thinking of as it relates to legislative changes that could affect this math that we're working with.
Well, I would say absolutely anything could change. You could see a different limit on your ability to levy local option funding. Right now, you can levy 33% of your operating budget in addition through a local levy. They could lower that lid. That was one of the things we fought in 2017, was to keep it at 33%. We have a formula built on student population. So we have a safeguard in place to cover this year's difficulty with enrollment, but it's the look back is the higher of the prior 2 years. So if you have another down year in student enrollment next year, it begins to become difficult when it comes to building your operating budget. They could remove the ability to move the salaries to capital. That's a fairly recent allowance that was made. And so I would say anything is always possible legislatively. We have the protection of the Supreme Court order in place through 2023, which is some measure of a guarantee that changes would immediately go back to the court for review and could potentially be struck down. So you have that safety net, which is more than you would normally have, right? You don't always have the ability to quickly argue in the courtroom that change doesn't comply with the agreement that was put in place when the case was settled. So there's never going to be true certainty, but this, you guys are certainly thinking long and hard and doing some very intentional planning around what we know today. So I would applaud you for the thoroughness of the work.
Thank you.
Brett?
Yes, Chris.
Brett? Melissa, what are the chances of, due to state revenue reductions, tax revenue reductions, that the allocation for the district could be reduced?
It's a possibility, and I would say in 2008, in the Great Recession, school funding cuts happened, even with, I think at the time the governor was a pro-education governor, but the hit to the state budget was so great that it was kind of across the board. I would say right now, I know for a fact that the governor is intentionally planning around the school finance plan, trying to avoid any cuts to it. Revenues have been better than anticipated, and we are probably 3 or 4 weeks away from the consensus revenue estimates being refreshed. So they're done in April for the future year, the fiscal year, but then in November, they get back together and they refresh the outlook ahead of the legislative session based on a lot of factors that developed. So it's an unknown. There is certainly planning in place among state agencies to prepare for budget cuts, but the effort will be to preserve the agreement in the Gannon case. And so let's all think positively and hope that we can work those budget numbers around it. There's also a crowd, I will add, there's a crowd that is using this crisis in an opportunistic way to argue for school choice legislation. That's another potential trap in the legislative session, that this idea of funding the student and setting up any number of different programs that amount to, whatever the terminology, they amount to vouchers so that parents can pay for private school with public tax dollars. So that is something to be very mindful of, that there are attempts to harness the emotion in play right now and change the way we fund education in Kansas in a fundamental way that represents something of an existential crisis for public schools. So I would be very careful of the rhetoric going around right now, because there are some folks whose intentions are very different than your typical public school supporter.
I might add too, one of the ways that school districts keep themselves out of trouble for the long term is to make sure that you're really paying close attention to your student-teacher ratios. That can get frustrating, I know, for parents, because class sizes can fluctuate from one year to the next, especially for your child, and there are reasons for that. Everybody wants the lowest class size possible, we all do. But by really keeping a close handle on the number of staff that you have and matching that up with the number of students you have, then you stay fiscally responsible with your finances, and you can keep your a sustainable funding model going. Districts that don't do that, you tend to end up with a lot very, very low class sizes, but a lot more staff, and at some point that catches up with you, and then you have to begin to let staff go because you can't afford the model that you created. I don't know, Russ, if you want to add to that. But the reason I add that is, again, that's where enrollment projections are important. Stay on top of where your student population is. Have ratios, stay within those ratios, and then you keep yourself out of long-term trouble that way financially.
Before we leave this question of, this particular question of guardrail around a 25% cap on salaries out of that capital box, are there any questions or thoughts about that? Does that make sense? Does it not make sense?
All right, great. Well, thank you for that part of the discussion, and we're going to use the next half hour to have some roundtable real quick on three items like we talked about. The first one is pretty quick, and that is that I think based on what's been presented, does anyone have any questions about us moving forward with a January of 2021 ballot initiative? Susan, I see you raising your hand there. I can unmute you too. There, I unmuted you.
Okay, thank you. I did have a question. I'm sorry to get my hand up quick enough about the guardrail. What is best practice? What are other districts doing? And I'm just curious, you know, as to how you came up with that amount. I hadn't heard it discussed before, and so that would be helpful to find out if I could.
The 25% guardrail based on tax revenues we receive each year still allowed about $10 million to $15 million for operation and maintenance to do cycle projects. We did not, if you go any higher than that, then you're competing with all the other budgetary items that we take out of the capital outlay fund, mainly the Apple devices are all being paid out of that. So that's where we kind of landed at that 25%. Districts around us, Olathe and Blue Valley, they've already went all in on their custodial salaries. So
That's what I was wondering, what other districts had in place, because I hadn't heard of that. I thought they had moved theirs completely, and so I was just trying to figure out, you know, what our approach was on the guardrail. So that was what I was trying to get those numbers and figure that out.
Does some of that have to do with the age of our facilities compared to Blue Valley and Olathe?
yeah,
who are
Blue Valley and
much
Olathe
newer
are
buildings?
growing, so they're building new facilities, but they also have bond referendum authority.
They get matching dollars from the state.
Olathe does, Blue
Right,
Valley does not.
right.
But we don't have a bond referendum to take those capital outlay needs from. Blue Valley and Olathe do. So they went all in, but they have the ability to shift some of that to bond referendum that they have. Now, when that runs out, they're going to be in a problem, and they'll have to do the same deal with getting more bond referendums.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think their age of their facilities is not as old as ours are.
Yeah, it takes quite a bit of planning to get there, I know. And I know that state statute, I believe, was passed in 2014, allowing for those funds to be moved. And so I was just curious, since we weren't privy to the discussion about the 25% as a committee, I was just trying to get my head around that because I had not heard of that before at any other institution. So thank you for giving your rationale on it.
Okay, thank you. Thoughts from the committee on the January 20 of 2021, the actual date would be January 26th. The board will need to make a decision at the next board meeting in order to put this on the agenda. Yes, Gary.
Has there been any thought about how soon that is after the general election? I mean, that's just kind of like, I don't know. I mean, people are already kind of getting that whole exhaustion already that's setting in with the general election. And I don't know if we throw another bond out, another thing for them to vote about and go to the polls about, or to vote by mail, actually, right?
Yep.
Okay, to vote by mail. Do you think we'll get a good response, or?
Yeah, we did give some thought to that because it is pretty close to the general election. The good thing is there's been quite a bit of information out about this to some degree within the community. And it won't be difficult to make sure that patrons have the information that they need to make a decision on how they're going to vote. My understanding is in past bond issues, well, the last one we did was mail-in, and we had a pretty good response rate to it. So mail-ins and other, like Blue Valley did mail-in last year, and that went well in terms of people participating in it and voting on it. So mail-in seems to work pretty well. Did that answer your questions?
Well, does it have to also do with the timing of being able to hire additional teachers? I mean, if we don't have bonding authority, how do we address the
I was
secondary?
going to ask that, if that.
Yeah,
Yes,
to some extent, it's such a strange year, isn't it? I mean, because just trying to do the hiring process is cumbersome because everything's remote. So it will, to get it really into the hiring process in a big way, it would have been nice to go in November, but that wasn't going to be possible. So it will help a little bit. But I think the big thing is that it allows us to get going on some of these projects for the summer months. If we were to delay it until the next available date, whenever that would be, then basically nothing would happen this coming summer. And now is a really good time to go out for bonds and new construction. So that was another factor that we considered as well. Great question, though, because that was something that we kicked around quite a bit before.
And as a reminder, and you can't see the smirk on my face, but there was a conversation about actually having it here in November. Kind of glad we didn't do that.
Do you think it's problematic, Gary?
No, not after the way Dr. Fulton explained it. I mean, because there's a timeline, my only concern was that, I'm very politically active, as everybody does, but I'm worn out. I'll be honest with you.
Uh-huh.
And everyone has that exhaustion that's set in. And I was just thinking it's like so soon after we just had what may end up being a very contentious general election that may still be going on, God only knows, in a couple months into the future. So it's just the whole timing. But if there's a timeline to get things done, I can understand that. And I know there are lots of secondary teachers who would like for us to get help to them. So I understand both points that Dr. Fulton was making.
I might add too, it's for the foreseeable future, it's going to be such an unusual experience in terms of running a bond issue in this kind of environment. A lot of what we're going to have to do from an information standpoint, from the district's perspective, is going to have to be digital anyway. Some of the typical things you might do, meeting with different groups, et cetera. Yes, we can do some of that remotely, but I imagine a lot of it is just going to be providing video and other kinds of digital information. And we'll be putting together a communication plan that we'll be talking about Monday night with the board on some strategies that might be helpful so that the residents get informed about what that bond issue might be, should we go ahead and decide to do that.
Well, and let me just ask one follow-up, and I apologize for my ignorance about this. Is there a certain percentage of people that have to vote in this bond election for it to matter, or does it not matter?
You have to correct me if I'm wrong here. I think if you have 50%, you just need one over.
Of the ballots cast, with no minimum ballots
Yeah,
cast.
no minimum, yeah.
So, and because it's an entirely mail ballot driven election, there isn't an action step for people to request a ballot like there is right now. Everybody's going to be mailed a ballot, is that correct? Because that is the way the election's being held. There's no in-person option. So it removes one action required. What people will need to do, obviously, is check the box and put the stamp, do those things. But we aren't dependent on people choosing to request the ballot to vote. So I think that should help.
All right, any other thoughts on that? And not to hurry things along, we have 15 minutes to go, and we've got a big second question here. Any other questions about that? The board will be deciding on that one, so I wanted the input from this group there. With that, let's move on to the ABC. This is the first time that you've been in the room where we've had a C as part of the conversation. So I'll open it up for your thoughts as it relates to the C option being added to the A and B options. Yes, Chris, go ahead.
Brad, what does not get built in a timely manner if option C is taken over option B?
Bob,
Is
you
there
wanna answer that one?
something that has got to be delayed that really should not be delayed?
Chris, probably the biggest piece of that is the elementary school that would not be rebuilt in Plan C, that would be rebuilt in Plan B. That's probably the biggest part.
But
of
it
that.
would be rebuilt in a future bond
That's correct.
referendum.
We're looking at,
Okay.
if you do C, probably 4 to 6 years out, you would be looking at doing it again, and you would be picking that up and some others at that time.
So my understanding is that if it's between option B and C, it would be Belinder that would be necessarily delayed, and maybe not even delayed, it just wouldn't be guaranteed until that next bond would be passed. A guarantee is probably not the right
And
word.
it may not
but-
change the time frame anyway.
Correct.
Correct.
That's my understanding, right?
So,
Okay,
okay.
thank you for that.
And is there a, how do I say this? Is there some way to say that all 5 attendance areas would receive a new elementary school in Plan C?
The problem is that we have newer buildings in some areas, so not
Okay.
all areas would be getting one in either B or C.
Okay.
The northwest area has newer buildings. We did rebuild Shawnee and Benninghoven in northwest, but they don't have anything in either Plan B or C.
For new
Okay.
For
facilities,
new facilities, I'm sorry.
but other
Is
work
that
is being done.
Could that be a problem?
I think it's going to be important to make sure that people understand the why of that. And
Okay.
it does go back to the age of the buildings. Yeah, that's an understandable question that people would pose. Why are the other 4 high school attendance areas getting new buildings, but Northwest is not? And the answer is pretty simple. We've done the rebuilds, and the others are relatively newer buildings.
Okay.
What new
Good
building, in
answer.
the last bond, which high school areas got new buildings?
All
five?
All 5.
So I'm going to add to this by saying, because this might go to our question number 3, and that is communication. As has been rolled out to us, this is a series of 3 bonds totaling $750 million over a period of time. I think that's a different opportunity to message, as opposed to, here's one big chunk, we're going to digest this chunk, get as much as we can done, and start from scratch. I think what might be helpful to your question, Chris, and to the community's question would be to say, and here's this longer-term process and plan that's being developed to say, and here's bond number 2, and here's bond number 3 for a total of $750 million. Is that helpful, do you think, to the voting public, and especially those that are concerned about the school in their neighborhood?
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Other thoughts about really B and C? Yes, Gary?
I think option C seems to be if you're asking us for our opinion, I think option C may be the best, just considering the polling that you got back, and the percentage, and then of course, and the cost per, I'm a homeowner in the district, and, to me, that's not a whole lot of money off of, and I'm a teacher, so I think option C probably seems to be the best, more accepted by the public, and if they're looking for our recommendation, my vote would be for option C. I think it meets a lot of the needs, and and I also think that Catherine Carpenter land, either sold or reused. I think that's good that it's in there, because that building needs to be taken. Something needs to be done with that building. So I like it that it's included in that.
Thank you. Other committee members with thoughts, questions, or just an opinion? Yes, Melissa?
I think C presents a smoother transition between the out years, the future bond proposals, as projected, and obviously things could change, but it is a much smoother transition, I think, to spread and smooth the impact to property values and tax levies. It looks like a good, a feasible, sustainable pathway to get to all of the work that the district intends. So I appreciate the compromise and the work that was done to find it, and could be supportive of C.
Okay. Thank you. Angie?
I agree with the previous 2 statements. In the business world, building and numbers, option A would be phenomenal. But one thing that always worries me, I live in the West area, and seen a lot of displacement and things like that in the area, and I know that people are moving here and there and whatnot. I know, with all the new facilities that are going into other districts, but trying to maintain that and the smooth transition. When you look at a tax increase, it affects everybody. That's what everybody thinks about. How much is my house going to raise? What's going to happen? And having a transition like that, because there are still a lot of people not working. We don't know what's going to happen in the next even 6 months, or what goes on with the area, with COVID or anything else that the state or government might put regulations as far as facilities, what they're going to do and change. Because I know for us, we get changes all the time when it comes to that, and the cost of that, would be prime for those manufacturers. That's going to trickle down to us as a district. But I think with the option C, having a small percentage and building up to it, I think it's something for a person to look at, just looking at this to say, okay, because when I first looked at it, I looked at the first increases. Okay, what's the first, what's the second, what's the third? Not even seeing the whole list of what's in that option, but what will that do for somebody that might be struggling already or trying to catch up? And those businesses that you see that are moving or restructuring or closing, or what may happen, the people that owns that property on all of those, their homes, working from home now too, because it's a stretch. It's a stretch for people, and seeing something like that I think would be really beneficial, and communicating it that way to that. And a lot of, at least for my neighborhood, I have a lot of retired, a lot of retired teachers and people that are on fixed income, and seeing that and being able to relay that effectively to them, because they might just see this on the minutes or hear about it, but to really get it out there in a way that, you know, everything's digitalized. What can they, how they can best see that? What's their method of information and letting them see that. I think that's going to be a lot of the votes that we're going to get into. If we're, for the votes, even though there's no cap, but having that, because I think it gives people peace of mind so they don't feel, you know, like things are tossed without them knowing that might not get the information. Sure. So.
Thank you. Others have thoughts on this to pass along as input to the board, and I'm looking at the pictures on the screen here. I'm clicking be screen. Do I see Chris? Yes, go ahead.
I concur with the three previous folks on what they were thinking about option C. I think it is solid. It gives you what you need. It doesn't delay anything that is imperative and may not delay the additional school construction any more than it already would have been. And it really does. I am extremely thrilled that the district has looked at a long-term approach. You know, 3 bond issues over 18 to 20 years is just, I can't thank you guys enough, and the board and the administration for doing what you've done. I think it's a great plan, and I appreciate you letting me say my piece.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Anyone else? Well, thank you. That input's very helpful. And now the third task here as we wrap up this discussion is about guidance for the board and the district on how best to communicate the merits of this bond. We've already touched on a few of what we'll call the timing issues. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and being able to try to communicate messages in this environment. Hopefully the commercials will change on TV after November, but certainly the messaging that will be important to communicate out. I think we're putting together a streamlined plan, but we're making it a little different because we're introducing the idea of a multi-tiered $750 million over 3 bonds as opposed to the one. The importance of the financial changes that we just talked about, where we're managing the operating, the capital, as well as the bond monies to best function as both a brick and mortar as well as a staffed school district. But I'll turn to you and say, what other issues do you think are right up at the top as important things to communicate to the average person who's going to receive that ballot in the mail? Melissa?
I would emphasize that this is a way of directing more money into the classroom in your operating budget. I think that's the heart of most of the critique is that, you know, we hear it, oh, they're building Taj Mahals, they're putting all their money into buildings, what about our teachers, what about our students? This is exactly how you get to that goal of putting as much of your operating budget into the operation of your classrooms to benefit your students and your teachers. This is the pathway to do it. So I would certainly emphasize that. And then I have a question, and then I'll cede the floor. I know earlier this summer you did a run through of your existing bonded indebtedness. And I know in the capital, there is the bond that paid for certain things expiring. Is there other existing bonds that will cycle out during the life of this new bond?
Russ?
Yeah, we'll have, the real one that will have a huge impact on capital outlay is the bonds, the $85 million worth of bonds that are capital outlay bonds. And those are only 5-year terms, and so they drop off in 2 more years. There was a slide that kind of addressed that, where we will know, and that's about $10.6 million of debt that's coming out of the capital outlay. And then, David is very good that when we issue these new bonds, he'll layer those in with the existing bonds that will retire through that year. If you want to add anything, David.
No, you got it exactly right, Russell. In addition to the capital outlay bonds that the district has that will pay off, you do also have several other outstanding bond issues that will pay off before any new bonds that you might issue payoff. So we've structured the new bonds to sort of wrap around the existing bond payments. In doing that, what you do is you keep your bond payment a little bit lower while the outstanding bonds are still being paid. And then after they're paid off, the payments on the new bonds would sort of ramp up. But overall, you'd have level payments.
That's exactly what I was getting at, and I think it's an important component of any messaging is exactly that scenario, that you are very much managing the overall bonded indebtedness very carefully.
And the other thing that we will look at that we haven't touched on, and we can't quantify right now to work into these projections, but I think there's a good chance that if your election is successful and you do go to issue bonds, there might be a chance to refinance some of the existing debt that you have outstanding and maybe keep the mill levy down that way also.
That's a good idea.
Other thoughts to share around the messaging as we begin to approach going to the public to help them better understand what they're being asked to vote for in a bond issue? I'm going to turn it around a little bit on you and say, what is your number one concern still as you think about the district putting this bond forward? Or have you already shared them with us?
Will there be a increase in mill levy and taxes in the future bonds? Has that been planned in? And have you planned in the use of any interest income?
Yes, it has been factored in. Russ, you want to go ahead and address that?
I didn't
Future
quite hear
increases.
what he asked. What'd you ask, Chris, about interest income?
Have you added that into the amount of monies that are spent, or can that be a kind of a reserve or contingency for needs unseen?
I would love to do that if it existed, but there's not a whole lot of interest out there these days. The interest rates are very, very low. We're not
So
generating a lot of
over
interest
the
on
years, when we had bonds before, we had at the end of the bond, there was some additional monies received based on interest.
I
Is
think-
it because the interest rates are so low that we don't really get that anymore?
Yeah, in your day, there was actually interest rates when you were with us.
Yeah.
Those don't exist anymore, but
Yeah, well, 30, 40, 50
we
years
will
ago.
definitely invest idle funds and make the most of that as much as possible.
Investment income, I guess.
Yeah,
And
Huh?
we did a really quick calculation, assuming that this Plan C passes and that you issue 2 series of bonds, one series immediately and then another series in a couple of years, making some assumptions about sort of spending that money equally over, a 4-year period of time. We calculated based on current interest rates, probably earning about $300,000 or so, which is a lot of
That's
money,
nothing.
but in comparison to a, $240, $260 million bond issue, it's not a lot. That money would be available to either pay project costs, anything that was, an authorized cost of the bond issue, or it could be turned back into the bond and interest fund and used to reduce the mill levy.
And to that end, actually, all of the options address this, but option C is illustration. We built a fairly conservative increase in assessed valuation. I don't know, Russ, if you want to talk about that, because that's the other thing is when you build this modeling, you want to be conservative. If it's better, great, but don't overreach in your modeling. So Russ, I don't even talk about assessed valuation.
Yeah, all these scenarios use a 2% AV over the life. If that goes up to 5%, that has a direct impact on your mill levy coming down. And it also will increase your ability to issue new bonds or additional bonds above the 242.9. Because there's always that calculation, and it's based on your assessed valuation that you can generate local taxes. David, do you want to add anything or?
No, I think you did a good job. With the 2% growth in assessed valuation that's been assumed, if recent past history is any indication, and you do have, 5 to 7% growth in your assessed valuation in the next few years, that mill levy increase of, 8.7 mills there, or $8 per 100,000, could very well not even be necessary. But again, to be conservative, we wanted to make, low growth rate assumptions and high assumptions on the interest rate on the bonds, just to make sure that, we can fulfill what was anticipated at least.
Thank you. How much of this information on this slide do you think the average person would find helpful versus overwhelming and confusing?
I think they'll find it overwhelming and confusing.
Okay, all right.
I think so too, unless you understand everything about bonds, mills, what's going on. To an average person, and mainly within the past year with the whole everything with COVID and all of the contract discussions and everything like that, I think right now, for at least for what I see, is how is this going to help the kids? How is this going to help the teachers? How is this going to help the school building, the restructuring of it? Because there's so many what ifs still.
Mm-hmm.
If someone went to me and said, well, who's supporting us? Are the teachers supporting us? What do they think? That's going to probably be something that someone's going to ask.
Mm-hmm.
But to say, option A gives about this much more in teachers or this much more into a classroom or per the student, I think that's something that most people will understand. But I think definitely going into what this is doing for the school, these are what's going to supply the supplies or equipment we're going to be redoing, and how this is going to help the support for all of the kids. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing, because that's what people think of. It's, in school district, you think about that. You don't think about bonds and levies and things like that.
All right.
Well,
Thank you. Gary?
and I think too, I think the thing that people are going to want to know is that we're going to get new schools for our kids, we're going to get more teachers for our students. And I think that's the two most important things. And, as someone who's made Shawnee Mission his home, I think it's, if you live in the Deemer attendance area and Deemer's getting a building rebuilt, even if you don't live in it, I live in a neighboring attendance area, that's an investment in my community, that new physical structure. And like Dr. Fulton was saying, that brings in new families to the neighborhood and everything else. And I think that's really important to homeowners on that level as well, because our schools, and the schools that are on that list, I've been in all of them, and the parents and the community know that those schools are just out of date. And I think it's just those two things, schools and more teachers for our kids. Two big issues.
And one thing too, it's not just bringing new ones, but it's keeping the ones from that might be looking around. I know within my house, just across my house, 3 houses have gone to sell. Now we're getting people with families, because all the people that are retiring and downsizing their homes, we're now getting more, which is great. And I think that's something that's really nice too, is keeping those and growing the families there.
Others?
Is there an environmental component to this, and energy savings by replacing these old buildings? I presume there is, that this is not just fiscally sound, but also, it's modernizing facilities to help conserve and protect.
It absolutely does, and I know Bob wants to jump in on this one, but it certainly has an impact. You're not putting a brand-new HVAC system into an old structure for which that HVAC system's really not built, as one example. Bob, you can take it from there.
Yeah, correct. It will make a difference. It's not as big as difference as you would like it to be, because the new guidelines are requiring more outdoor air into the building also. But you are looking at a savings in utility costs.
Well, I know we replaced second-story windows in the middle of summer, and I know there's a material difference in the climate inside our home, and I would imagine the age of our buildings, that you have some issues that you could use as selling points based on energy use and environmental building practices and materials. Chris, you probably have thoughts on that.
We used LED lightings on all the new schools, and that's a significant savings there in itself.
Plus, the instructional spaces are much better.
And
It's probably an understatement.
Yes, Chris?
is it understood that we would design to at LEED standards, either LEED silver, gold, whatever it might be, even though we might not get certified, we still design to those exceptionally good standards? That would mean the recycling component would be part of that. The energy efficiency component would be part of that. I think, I'm pretty sure that's pretty much standard practice now in schools, isn't it?
It is, and your new building codes takes a lot of that in consideration too. Most cities adopted the 2018 codes that require that, but we will design
Approach.
to LEED.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Oh, I was just going to say, as from the teacher perspective, please involve the teachers in the design of these new schools, because I can tell you, I know teachers who teach in some of the new buildings, and they love them. They're beautiful, but they've always, without fail, have said, I wish they would have asked us about X, Y, and Z before they had done it. And so, just as a teacher, I think you get a lot of really good input from them when it comes to the design of the building and building instructional areas and stuff.
Good, thank you.
Good point.
Could I just put up another piece of the
Your mic.
Mike. Another piece of this plan moving forward is a guardrail around the operational funds, and I think it's worth this committee weighing in on this piece. This is another policy piece the board will need to be considering, and that is putting a guardrail on kind of a minimum operating fund balance. And I know questions in the recent past came up about this, and I don't know if this is a group who wants to either ask questions about it or if it's worth spending a moment or two here.
Brad?
Go ahead.
What
Yes,
would the
Chris.
guardrails consist of, and how would they be approached? And what are you suggesting as a guardrail?
Well, these are in place currently.
They are, we have not adopted them officially as a board,
Okay.
these guardrails.
We're operating based on, go ahead.
Yeah, we are operating based on. So the two pieces of this plan, we talked a little bit about the 25% guardrail around capital, the capital dollars. This is around kind of the operational funds and maintaining kind of a minimum balance, and recommendations from, is 1 to 2 months worth of expenditures. And so kind of the way, Russ, feel free to.
No, that is
Sorry.
correct. And we would use June 30th as our target, our measurement date, because that's the end of our fiscal year. So when we would go through the budget developmental process internally, and then what we would present to the board, our goal would be to maintain a minimum of 8.3%. We surely would like to be higher than that. We're currently a little bit over 9%. But we definitely would not go lower than 8.3%.
So this allows us to manage for cash flow, but also is there bond implications for kind of a cash flow balance?
There definitely is bond implication for, on your credit for fund balances. And unfortunately, it's the way they look at, and I say they, I mean Moody's, the rating agency, looks at those fund balances. It isn't really easy to explain. They look at about 6 different funds, and they look at those fund balances as a percentage of the revenues in those funds. So it's not as neat and easy as just saying, 1 month. It gets a little bit more detailed. I'd be happy to, I've got some information in the latest rating report, and I'd be happy to kind of go through the details with you if you want to. But it's a little bit complicated.
Thank you. So we are almost 15 minutes over our time here. So I'm going to put a ribbon on this conversation about the best ways to provide guidance to the board and to the district. Yes, Melissa?
I just wanted to weigh in on that last question. I think this is the minimum I would think you would want as a district. And having fought many, many years of legislative battles over school district ending balances and fund, the reserve funds and all of that, it's not prudent to spend down any farther than this person. I think this is I would feel better if you were at 10%. So I think 8.3 is reasonable and responsible, and I think definitely you want to proceed as a board putting some guidance in place to protect that ending balance. I think that's just good practice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and okay. And I should clarify, we have been practicing on that. The clarification I was kind of looking at Brad about was more of an overt policy adoption.
I would recommend it. I think there's still a lot looming legislatively that I think you need to put your feet down and protect the fiscal responsibility that you have to operate and balance all of your obligations.
Brad, working with 9% right now, is there any chance that you could get to 10% in an easy way? Because I agree with Melissa, 10% during these times of, let's say, we don't know what's going to happen next year kind of situation, it would be really wise to kind of give ourselves a little bit of extra cushion, I think. That's my
I'm going to
2 cents worth.
Okay,
Thank you very much for everything.
I'm turning to Dr. Fulton and say, would you like to respond? And
Is this a good segue?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go. It's important to have strong balances, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Russell, let him add to that. I'm concurring with what folks are saying. Go ahead.
Yes, if you want to get to 10%, you just have to make that commitment. You got to have board support, and then during our budget developmental process, we got to carve out, either get more revenues or really carve out the expenditures so that we are at that 10%. So you just really have to make a strong fiscal responsibility and a commitment to doing that.
Yeah, I can add to that too. And that's the problem is with limited amounts of additional revenues coming in, it's difficult to climb from where you're at up to where you really ideally would be. And so that's the balance that we've been trying to strike. Mm-hmm. Because you do also want to compensate people fairly and address additional operating expenses that do occur. So, and hopefully, then you're ready for when you have a pandemic. And we've had some support from the federal and state government, but we don't know what comes next and what those expenses are going to be. And this is a great example of why you have to keep those balances strong so you're ready for the bad times.
Angie?
And that's kind of what I was thinking, because we don't know how things are going to happen until after Election Day on a lot of the things that may happen. But with that being said, I think something like this, because I think just to a general person, they think there's money for each little thing from one big pot instead of the separate pot still. And having something like, okay, this is what this covers, this is what this covers, this is what this covers, why the bond is there, just really explaining it in depth is going to be helpful. And we don't know what's going to happen, again, like we've been saying, but I know we're not really using so much of our facilities now. I think one thing too is to give the assurances that we're trying to get back to a somewhat of a normal to use it, because I know, playing devil's advocate, well, if we're not using it then why are we going to put this money in this now, or what's going to happen? Something to think about, but also we're not renting things or the buses and whatnot. Have we lost money? Have we been able to conserve it and kind of just, put it away for another rainy day, or how that can help? Because I know we've had to shift things. It's been difficult for all of our schools, elementary schools, now definitely the high school and middle school. They're just now about to try to start to go back. I was at our school today just trying to, so then they're trying to maintain, and I love some of the renovations because of what we've had to change to make social distancing possible in our schools. But I think, how can we effectively communicate that to our community as well? Should something go back, how are we going to be prepared and let the community know that, with our schools?
We have one more item on the agenda, and it's to talk about the updated finances, which goes into that segue. I need to be at a spot at 6 o'clock. I'm teeing up that next meeting. So I will be glad to turn it over to Mary if you want to do that. I just don't know if I close my laptop, if this whole thing shuts down. I don't know enough to know.
Did you
I
put me as
believe-
host?
If you're the, Shannon, I believe, is the host, so I think you're okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that when something kind of went a little bit haywire earlier, the host role isn't on me. So Brad, if you go and click on Mary, and you should be able to grant her host permissions. Or me, I'm happy to fulfill that as well.
Yeah, I can make you the presenter. I can't make Mary the presenter for some reason. A presenter is different than host, right?
Right. I am
Correct.
presenter. So you just need to make me host.
Not
Let me
based on what I can see.
Should we go ahead and move to the next agenda item so that?
Yeah.
You just give me the computer
I
back.
think,
Sorry, folks.
and the meeting, the event should continue even without Brad, but if we want to just make sure, that's fine.
Let's go ahead and shift to the second agenda item.
Okay.
And Yes.
You just want me to give an update of where we're at with our head count?
financially,
Okay.
just kind of a 30,000
Yep.
foot view.
So as you know, our operating revenue, our general state aid is all based on the September 20th count. So our head count is down about 1,500 kids, okay? That will not have a financial impact this year, because like Melissa said, she nailed it, it's the higher of the two prior years. So we'll actually be working on 18-19 school year for our head count. Now, what will impact us is the weightings. So that's your at-risk, free lunch count, your bilingual, and your CT, which is what used to be called vocational. Those weightings will impact this year, and those will be down.
Oh, that was my bad, sorry.
Okay. I'll have a better idea what that number is in November. Our auditor, the KSDE auditors are here right now. They'll be here for 3 weeks. They're right in the other side of that room. And they'll tell us what that dollar amount is. But we will lose revenue on that. We will lose revenue on our facility rentals because we're not renting. So those will be two big ticket items. Hopefully to offset that, we do have a lot of vacancies that we're trying to fill and we can't fill, or we're just deciding not to fill them because we don't need them. So we'll see how that shakes out. Utility-wise, we really don't know what utilities are going to do until we get through the winter months. Last year, we had a phenomenal winter, and we saved thousands of dollars on our utilities. So we won't really have a good idea on that until probably March. So we will lose revenues, and we hopefully will have some offset on expenditures as well.
If I can add one point of, not clarification, but additional information. We talk about staffing, not needing them. That really goes back to, as you know, we had a number of students that did not return. And whenever you do that, then you don't have to fill all of the teaching spots that otherwise you would have likely filled. And we always factor into, in any given school year, the potential need for additional staff should that need arise. But we were able to hold the line on that this year, and that helped because we did have a drop in student enrollment.
So can I ask a question? In terms of operational costs in a pandemic, I mean, with the different learning modes the district is cycling through, I think there can be a perception that well, the kids weren't in person, therefore the district wasn't spending as much. I think it might be important to clarify the ways that impacts expenses that the district incurs as you're coping with the health requirements.
Sure. We are spending. We don't get out of spending because we'll have contractual teacher salaries that we do spend. The staffing, I think pretty much stayed pretty stable or the same as what it was.
Well,
They
teachers
did
were
shift.
still teaching whether
They're
kids
teaching, they're
were
just-
physically here or not,
Yeah,
right?
they're
That's
just
right.
teaching remote. So we had teachers that would have been in person, they went to remote. So overall, the number of vacancies has been constant. That did not go up and down. So when I was talking a little bit earlier about vacancies, it's more in our custodials and our paras and our A's. Those are getting hard to fill. But no, the buildings are open and operating, so we have utilities, we have supplies. We're spending a lot of supplies on PPE and cleaning, but fortunately, we got CARES money to handle that.
Is there an impact on transportation now that you're starting to bring students back in where are we, hybrid?
Hybrid.
Talk about a little bit about the impact of operating in a hybrid mode, operating in, these
Yeah.
various, in person, but with smaller cohorts of kids. That's got to have an impact on the budget that is not cost savings.
Well, the transportation routes are substantively the same. You just have fewer students, which is good because you want to be able to spread students out more, particularly on the buses. When you're in remote only, you're hanging on to all of your drivers. You have to because eventually the goal is to get all students, or at least some of the students, back into class, whether that's all in or hybrid. Food service is kind of in the same boat. You may be able to go with a few reduced staff, but you have to maintain staffs for when you bring students back in. So there's real ongoing costs that doesn't change.
I would add, our food service fund is looking very bleak. We don't have that income coming in because, all the meals are free for everybody. So we've lost those revenue streams. The only thing we're getting reimbursed is at the federal summer lunch program rate. So we have those labor costs and the food costs. So we're keeping a very close eye on the food service, and if we need to support that comes from operating funds. Our food service fund has always been run extremely tight and very well and efficient by Nancy. And so if we go upside down on that, it comes from operating funds.
And I would say one thing too, is I know that's what worries me too, 'cause we're living in the area that I'm at, the food service is a very important thing for the kids in my neighborhood, but also too with like the busing, I know with my kids playing sports, because of the busing, knowing the amount that we have to rent the buses, they're only allowing so many kids, so you're paying more for more buses with less kids on it, which is a lot. In the district, and trying to make sure we're having that as well. That's something I think people don't realize. I know when you guys had mentioned that you guys spent so much, I think, on HVAC or something, that you guys had bought something earlier this year. I was happy to see that, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, okay, there's an expense that you guys are doing during this time. And I think when people see numbers of all the things you had to buy, that you're ahead of the curve trying to get the sanitizer, the masks, and everything. I think people don't realize those are costs that you had to get, and that's a disinfectants and things. I know me, for my business, it was something too, to try to go and find that. But knowing that you're having, I think that puts more faith in where the money is, and where is it going, what happened. Because like you said, people are like, oh, they're not in school, so, we saved so much money on electricity. Well, you got to maintain your building correctly, so you still have to run everything and have things there and keep things sanitized and clean. And the renovations that took place for that. And I think explaining that out, I think, is very important when you deal with the finances, because I think everybody, they just want to know, because they don't understand that part of it. That just helps them out too.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'm looking online. I don't see any other hands. Dr. Fulton, anything else for any other questions or comments?
I just want to thank this committee for your time. It's very valuable to us. The feedback has been extremely informative as we've gone through this process together.
Thank you all for being with us and for your time and thought and energy, both in person and online. All right. This concludes our meeting. Thank you so much. And this link will be posted to the website, so folks can watch it again later if you'd like. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary.